When did the civil rights movement start? Was it in 1775 when the first abolitionist society was formed? Or in 1663 when the first slave revolt was planned? Maybe it was in 1526 when the first slaves ran away to join the Indians. Then again, you might say that it began thousands of years ago, when, even then, human beings were oppressed by their fellow men, and they found there is something in the human spirit which can't stand chains. By Frank Cieciorka. But who was Frank Cieciorka, and how is he an unsung hero? Frank Cieciorka was born April 26, 1939, and raised in Johnson City, New York. By 1959, he had moved down to San Jose, where Frank attended San Jose State College. And in 1960, Frank helped create TASK, toward an active student community for the college. In 1964, Frank and 5 other students from San Jose State would leave California to attend 2 weeks of self-defense orientation at Western College in Oxford, Ohio, before heading into Mississippi for the Freedom Summer Project. The goal of the Freedom Summer Project was to help register African American voters as well as set up freedom schools for African Americans. During the project, Frank was positioned up north in Holly Springs County, where he held the position as the organizer for the volunteers portion, as well as field organizer for SNCC. But just because this is what Frank spent most of his time doing, didn't mean things wouldn't get dangerous. More often than not, while helping someone vote, Frank would get beaten, bruised, and even thrown in jail. Even small things like getting a t-shirt from university could be dangerous.
Okay, Freedom Summer stories. Well, there are a couple. The one that he liked, because it was kind of funny, was about when he and a fellow worker in the cause, I don't know what you call him exactly, a man named Hardy Fry, who was a black man, and they decided that they were going to go to the University of Mississippi and get 2 Old Miss sweatshirts to wear while they were doing their Freedom Summer work. And so, spoiler alert, they got the sweatshirts. It's not about how to get the sweatshirts. It's about what it was like in those times to do something like that. And a black man and a white man couldn't walk down the street together. They couldn't share a sidewalk. And Hardy Fry put on overalls. And he walked a distance behind Frank, and if it seemed like he was drawing any attention, then he'd drop to his knees, pretend to be a gardener, and start pulling weeds. Because he had no business there. A black man really, no students, there were no black students, it was completely segregated, and a black man had no reason to be there because he couldn't be a student. So even a black man being in a place that maybe he really didn't belong was threatening and could have led to confrontations of various sorts. And so they had to pretend. And Hardy had to dive off the sidewalk and get on his knees in the grass, because that's where a black man should be, on his knees someplace. While white people got to stand up and walk around freely. It's hard to imagine that now. Most people on a public sidewalk feel relatively safe about just walking down the street. And to step aside for someone else is a politeness, not a requirement. So that kind of sets the tone for the times.
By 1965, when Freedom Summer was nearing its end, Frank wrote a book called Negroes and American History, a Freedom Primer, which was a children's coloring book about the amazing and influential things that happened in history thanks to African Americans. From the American Revolution to Toussaint Louverture, Frederick Douglass and Negro cowboys, W. Du Bois, and the modern movement itself. After 1965, Frank moved back to San Francisco and made prints, while also working and illustrating for a newspaper called The Movement. One of the prints that Frank made is called Fist, and it became extremely popular with civil rights activists. The symbol became so popular that it was used in protest as pins, signs, and even used as a cover for the Movement newspaper. On October 20th, 1967, in Oakland, Frank and many other citizens participated in a protest called Stop the Draft Week, which was used as a way to help prevent more soldiers and troops from being sent to Vietnam. In the 1970s, the civil rights had calmed down, and Frank moved to Alder Point up in Humboldt County, where he would meet a woman named Karen Horn and her daughter Zena Hunt. And they would later become the grandfather, grandmother, and mother of a boy named Bryce Hunt. Me. Unfortunately, Frank passed away November 20th, 2008, from lung cancer, and even though I never really got to know him in person, I know Frank was a good man who cared for the people he loved and fought for the people who knew were wronged, and I think that's what makes him an unsung hero.